The restaurant's table only has room for your brother's family, my dad said on the phone. We'll invite you next time. I still remember how his voice sounded that morning, cheerful, almost apologetic, as if what he said wasn't the most familiar kind of rejection I'd known my whole life. He didn't mean to hurt me. He never did. But words like that, gentle and casual, had a way of cutting clean. I stared at my phone, a bitter laugh catching in my throat. Next time, he said. What he didn't know was that this time the restaurant he'd booked for Thanksgiving dinner, the one so exclusive he bragged about for weeks, belonged to me. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, one of those gray Boston mornings that smell like cold rain and cinnamon coffee. The office of Evergreen Table hummed quietly below my feet. From the mezzanine window I could see my staff moving with their usual precision, setting linens, polishing silverware, rehearsing smiles. Every table was booked solid, every reservation confirmed. For most people, Thanksgiving meant warmth and togetherness. For me it meant control and order, the kind that kept me from falling apart. My name's Hannah Porter. I'm 32, head chef and owner of Evergreen Table, a 2 Michelin star restaurant that had become Boston's most coveted dining spot. From the outside, it looked like success, but behind those clean marble counters and wine-scented evenings was a story built from loneliness. You see, I didn't inherit my father's empire. I built mine from scratch with burnt fingers, overdrafts, and nights I fell asleep beside the fryer. So when Dad called that morning sounding like he was delivering an ordinary family update, something inside me froze. I could almost picture him sitting in the sunroom back home, the same one where I used to peel potatoes as a teenager, while my older brother Daniel charmed our parents with stories of scholarships and promotions. The table's only got space for your brother's family, he'd said, as if space was the real problem. It wasn't about space. It never was. They'd done this before: birthdays, Christmas dinners, family photos I wasn't around for. But Thanksgiving had always stung the most. That was my mother's holiday before she died. She used to make each of us share something we were thankful for, and somehow, even when Dad forgot the cranberry sauce or Daniel spilled the gravy, it felt sacred. After she passed, everything changed. The warmth left the table, and the seat that used to be mine stayed empty year after year. I put my phone down, staring at the marble counter. The rain outside began tapping against the window, steady and cold. In the reflection, I could see my own face, composed, distant, the look of someone who'd learned long ago not to beg for inclusion. But the ache was still there, raw, under the professionalism. I'd spent years building walls to keep it out. Mark, my general manager, walked in with a clipboard. "We're full for the week," he said, flipping pages. "We even got a last-minute VIP booking, Harold Porter party of 10. I looked up sharply. "What did you say, Harold Porter?" "Private dining room. Tomorrow night." He smiled faintly. "Apparently the guy has connections." The sound that escaped my throat wasn't a laugh, it was something colder. "Yeah," I said softly. "He does." Mark frowned, sensing something in my tone. "Everything okay? Perfect," I said, forcing a smile. "Absolutely perfect." After he left, I sat there for a long time, my hands resting on the desk. The irony was almost poetic. My father had excluded me from Thanksgiving, then booked his grand family dinner at my restaurant. The same place he once called a hobby that'll run out of steam. He'd be sitting under the chandeliers I picked, tasting the recipes I perfected, enjoying the music I curated. All while I, the person who made it possible, was nowhere on the guest list. For a moment my throat tightened the way it used to when I was 15, and overheard him tell my Aunt Hannah's sweet, "But she doesn't have Daniel's ambition." That sentence had followed me for years like a curse I could only silence with success. And now success was the only language I had left. I rose from the chair and walked to the glass wall overlooking the dining floor. My staff moved like clockwork, folding napkins into soft triangles, aligning wine glasses with laser precision. Each sound, the shuffle of shoes, the hiss of espresso, echoed like music. My music. That was when it hit me. The power I'd been giving away all my life, the desire to be seen, to be invited, it was mine to reclaim. My family had built their dinner on the foundation of my work, and for the first time I held every card. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Dad. Sorry if that sounded harsh earlier. You know how space gets tight. Maybe we can do Christmas together. Christmas. Always next time. Always later. Always somewhere I didn't belong. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Then I opened the reservation system again. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, steady now, deliberate. I clicked Harold Porter, party of 10. The cursor blinked beside a single button, cancel reservation. My reflection on the screen smiled back at me. Not bitter, not angry, just certain. They said family only, I whispered to no one. Let's see how the family feels when the door doesn't open for them. I pressed confirm. Downstairs, the sound of laughter floated up from the kitchen, the smell of rosemary and butter filling the air. The restaurant didn't flinch. It never did. Outside, the rain had stopped. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the quiet hum of the building beneath me. Thanksgiving would come as it always did, but this year it would taste different. For once, I wasn't the daughter waiting for a seat. I was the woman deciding who got one. By morning, the rain had frozen into a thin sheet of ice along the restaurant's windows, turning the city into glass. I arrived before sunrise, as I always did on holidays when most of Boston still slept. Inside Evergreen Table, the air was warm, filled with the faint scent of coffee and polished oak. My staff moved quietly, respectful of the tension that always hung in the air before Thanksgiving service. It was the kind of day that could make or break a reputation. I liked that pressure. It was predictable, unlike family. Mark was already in the kitchen checking produce deliveries. We got the heirloom pumpkins in, he said without looking up, and the wine shipment came early. Everything's running smoothly. Good, I replied. Let's keep it that way. He nodded, scribbling notes on his clipboard. The kitchen lights flickered against the stainless steel counters, and for a moment I just stood there listening to the rhythm of the place, the sound of my world running perfectly without anyone's approval. Then, of course, the universe reminded me that perfection never lasts. Mark handed me a printout of the day's reservations. We're booked out completely, he said. 12 private events, including one. We still haven't confirmed Harold Porter party of 10. He hesitated before continuing. Do you want me to call and double-check that cancellation you requested? I met his eyes. No, I said. Leave it as is. He gave a slow nod, though I could see the question forming. You sure that's a big table to drop the day before Thanksgiving? The PR alone, I'll handle it, I interrupted. He knew better than to push. He just nodded again and walked away, the sound of his shoes fading against the tiled floor. The rest of the morning unfolded like any other kitchen prep supplier calls staff briefings. But no matter how many spreadsheets I reviewed or how many knives I sharpened, I couldn't shake the ghost of my father's voice from the day before. The table only has room for your brother's family. It repeated itself like a drumbeat, not loud, not angry, just steady. I tried to drown it out by moving faster. I went through the dessert list, adjusted the tasting menu, checked the temperature logs, and reviewed the seating chart. Every small task became a form of control, a way to keep the chaos from seeping in. At 10, I stepped into my office. The morning light hit the glass wall, spilling across the framed article from Boston Herald, "The Woman Behind Evergreen Table." I remembered the day that photo was taken, me in the kitchen, hair tied back, smile tight. The reporter had asked, "What drives you?" I'd said hunger, not for food, for respect. The intercom buzzed. Mark's voice came through, steady but hesitant. "You've got a visitor." I frowned. "A visitor, your father," he said quietly. For a moment I thought he was joking. Then I heard it, his laugh echoing faintly down the corridor. My stomach tightened. "Send him in," I said. The door opened, and there he was. Harold Porter in his camel coat and scarf, smelling faintly of cologne and self-assurance. He looked around the office, impressed. "You've done well, Hannah," he said, his voice casual, practiced. "The place looks beautiful." I didn't answer. I just gestured toward the chair across from my desk. He sat brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. I hope you didn't take yesterday the wrong way. You know how these things go, limited seating, everyone wants to bring someone. I watched him talk, noting the way he avoided my eyes. And yet I said you managed to find 10 seats for everyone else. He smiled the same way he used to when he was cornered. You always were sharp. I'm sure we'll find another time. I leaned forward. Funny thing about timing, Dad. You booked your Thanksgiving dinner here. His face changed. Here I nodded slowly. Evergreen table. Party of 10. Private room. He laughed once nervously. That's, well, what a coincidence. Yeah, I said softly. A coincidence. Silence filled the room. For a moment I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the clink of cutlery from the kitchen below. Then I said, the reservation's been canceled. He blinked. What, I canceled it? Why would you do that? His tone shifted, no longer apologetic but defensive. We're customers, Hannah. Paying customers. Your family, I said. Remember? His face flushed. You can't just, I interrupted. I own this place. The truth landed between us sharp and clean. He looked at me for a long moment, the pride in his eyes flickering into something else, confusion, maybe even guilt. You're serious? Completely. He stood up, pulling his coat tight. Well, he said stiffly, I suppose I'll have to make other arrangements. Good luck, I said. Everything decent in town's been booked for months. He hesitated at the door, his hand on the knob. You're really doing this? I tilted my head. You already did. He left without another word. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled not from anger but release. I'd been waiting my whole life for that moment. The one where I didn't have to explain myself, where I didn't have to shrink to make someone else comfortable. I turned back to the glass wall, watching the staff move below, servers rehearsing their lines, chefs plating test dishes. The hum of the restaurant felt different now, like it had finally shifted into my rhythm. Mark stepped back in, careful as always. Everything okay? I smiled faintly. It will be. He hesitated. You sure you don't want me to rebook the porters? Maybe no, I said, my voice steady this time. Let them find their own table. He nodded and left again. I looked out the window. The snow had begun to fall, soft, slow, inevitable. The city blurred into quiet shades of white and silver. Somewhere people were thawing turkeys, lighting fireplaces, and setting tables. And somewhere else my father was realizing that money couldn't buy every seat. For the first time in years, I felt full. Not from food, not from victory, just from the stillness that comes when the balance finally shifts in your favor. Tomorrow would be Thanksgiving, and for once, it would be mine. Thanksgiving morning arrived in a haze of frost and quiet. The streets outside Evergreen Table were still the kind of stillness that only happens right before something breaks. Inside the kitchen was a live steam chatter, the rhythm of knives on cutting boards, the low hiss of butter melting on pans. The air was thick with rosemary and anticipation. I moved through the space like a conductor before a symphony, checking sauces, tasting reductions, adjusting plating. The kitchen was my church, and today's service was the sermon. But under all the motion, there was that low hum of tension. Everyone felt it, though no one said a word. My father's canceled reservation had traveled through the grapevine like a rumor in a small town. Mark didn't mention it, but I could tell he knew. His glances lingered longer than usual, his tone softer, cautious. At 9:30, I slipped into my office. The window pane was fogged from the cold, and the city beyond was still waking up. On the desk, my phone buzzed. 17 missed calls, all from my father. The first voicemail was short-clipped. Hannah, there's been a mistake. Call me back. The second more frustrating. We need to talk. This isn't how family handles things. By the fifth, his voice cracked with something like desperation. I can't find another place. Everywhere's full. Your brother's kids are asking what's happening. Hannah, please? I stared at the screen for a long time. My reflection stared back, pale, still unreadable. For years I had been the one begging for a seat, for a chance to belong. Now the calls came from the other side, and I felt nothing but the calm ache of justice. I locked the phone, set it face down, and picked up the schedule for the day. "Focus," I whispered. "Just focus." But focusing was harder than it used to be. Every corner of this restaurant, every brick and polished floorboard carried a memory of struggle. The long nights I'd spent perfecting my recipes after the food truck closed. The months I couldn't pay rent. The day I opened the doors of Evergreen Table for the first time and whispered, "Please let them come." And now the man who once called my dream a phase was begging for a table. The intercom crackled. "Chef, the press photographer's here," one of the hosts said. "She wants a quick shot for the holiday feature." "Give me 5, I replied, steadying my voice. The camera crew arrived a few minutes later, 2 people efficient and cheerful. "We're doing a Thanksgiving spotlight on local restaurants," the woman said, adjusting her lens. "Your story's incredible. Self-made 2 stars community events. Boston loves you." I smiled automatically, the kind that hides everything. "Thank you." They snapped a few shots. Me standing by the kitchen window, stirring a sauce, plating a dish. Between flashes, I caught sight of the private dining room, the one my father had booked. The door was open, the table gleaming under chandeliers, linens, crisp glasses catching the light like tiny suns. For a heartbeat, I pictured it full, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the way my family would have filled it without me. The image twisted something deep inside. Chef Porter, the photographer, said softly, pulling me back. "That last one was perfect." After they left, I stood there alone, staring at that empty table. It felt symbolic now, not just a place to eat, but a monument. To everything I'd survived. To everyone who had underestimated me. At 11, Hazuare Mark came to my office again, holding a clipboard, but not really looking at it. "There's been another call," he said carefully. "Your father. He's, persistent." I sighed. "How many times? 8, maybe 9, since this morning. He sounds desperate." "Then let him be desperate," I said quietly. Mark hesitated. "He said they have nowhere to go. His brother flew in. The kids I know, I cut in. But I'm not their backup plan." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've earned the right to say that." I turned back to the window, watching the light shift over the snow-covered roofs. "I don't want to hurt them," I said finally. "But I do want them to feel it. Just once." The afternoon crept in. Customers began arriving, the restaurant filling with warmth and noise. Families, couples, old friends, everyone laughing, clinking glasses, trading stories. Evergreen Table pulsed with life, and I moved among them with practiced grace, smiling, greeting, tasting, adjusting. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Mark watching me. He wasn't judging, just observing, maybe trying to understand the quiet war happening behind my calm. At 3, I stepped outside for air. The street was blanketed in snow, and the sky had turned the color of slate. I took a long breath, the cold burning my lungs. My phone buzzed again. I didn't need to look to know who it was. "Dad, we're waiting outside. Please talk to me." I froze. Through the glass door, I could see them. My father, my brother Daniel, his wife, their 2 kids, all bundled in coats, shivering slightly. Their faces were pale, expectant. Behind them, the glowing sign of Evergreen Table reflected in the window. Mark appeared beside me. "They've been there 15 minutes, he said quietly. "Want me to send them away?" I looked at them again. My father's hand was resting on my nephew's shoulder, his eyes darting toward the door, toward me. "No," I said finally. "Let them wait." Mark hesitated. "For how long?" "As long as it takes." I turned and walked back into the kitchen. The warmth hit me instantly, the air thick with spice and sound. My heartbeat slowed, matching the rhythm of knives and laughter. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless. Inside, I smiled a small, quiet smile that didn't reach my eyes. For once, it wasn't me standing in the cold waiting to be let in. This time I held the key. The snow thickened by the hour, falling in quiet sheets that softened the city's noise. Inside the Evergreen Table, the warmth glowed, golden candles flickering along polished tables. Laughter and music blended into a low hum, the sound of people belonging. And outside, behind the frosted glass doors, my family waited. From the mezzanine, I could see them through the haze of condensation, figures bundled in coats, their breath fogging the air. My father stood closest to the door, stiff and stubborn as ever, one gloved hand pressed to his phone. Beside him, my brother Daniel shifted impatiently, his wife clutching her fur collar, the two kids stamping their feet to stay warm. They looked small against the restaurant's facade, fragile, out of place. Mark came up beside me. "They're still out there," he said quietly. "I know." He hesitated. "People are starting to notice. Some guests mentioned that the family outside looks uncomfortable." I kept my gaze on the window. "They'll be fine." He exhaled slowly. "You're sure you want to do this?" "Do what I asked," finally turning to him. "Stand in the warmth of the house I built, and let them feel the cold they handed me for years." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I went back to work. The kitchen was alive, the kind of chaos that only professionals understand. Flames leapt under copper pan servers, darted between stations, the air thick with the perfume of roasting turkey and butter. The private dining room, the one my father had reserved, stood ready, every candle lit, every plate gleaming. It was perfect, and I intended for it to stay empty. By 5:00 p.m., the main room was full. Guests toasted to health and love forks, clinking laughter, rolling like warm thunder. I circulated through the tables, smiling when I needed to, congratulating couples on their anniversaries, thanking regulars for returning. But beneath it all, my heart pounded with quiet defiance. Every sound, every sparkle of light, it was mine. My creation. Around 5:30. Mark appeared again, holding his phone like something fragile. "Your father called again," he said carefully. "He's asking to speak to you directly. I'm busy." I told him that Mark said. He said, and I quote, "Tell her she's making a scene. We're family, not beggars." I smiled without humor. "Funny. That's exactly how they treated me." Mark hesitated. "Hannah, it's 20 degrees out there. Then maybe they'll learn something about warmth." He lingered for a moment, then nodded and left. When I finally looked toward the front again, the streetlights had come on. My father's posture had changed. He was pacing now, coat pulled tighter, phone pressed to his ear. Daniel was arguing with him, his hands moving sharply. I couldn't hear their voices through the glass, but I didn't need to. I knew that tone. Blame, confusion, disbelief, the three languages of the Porter men. One of the kids started to cry. My stomach twisted, not from guilt but from memory. I remembered being their age, standing in the cold outside a theater my father had taken Daniel to see. "I'd been too young," he said. He told me he'd bring me next time. That night I watched the marquee lights blur through my tears while they walked inside. Next time never came. A hand brushed my arm. Mark again. His voice was low. "If you're going to talk to him, do it now, before this gets ugly." I nodded once, though my throat felt tight. "Tell him to wait in the lobby," I said. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open. The winter air rushed in, carrying the smell of snow and disappointment. My father stepped inside first, stamping his boots, his coat dusted white. Daniel followed his jaw, tight eyes sharp. "5 minutes," I said to Mark. "No one else comes near." He nodded and slipped away. My father looked around the lobby, his eyes moving over the marble floors, the flickering candles, the smell of roasted herbs drifting in from the kitchen. "You've done well," he said. "I'll give you that." "Save the compliments," I said. "They're expensive here." He frowned. "What's all this about Hannah? You've made your point. The reservation's canceled, fine. But making us stand out there in the cold, that's not you. You don't know me," I said quietly. "You never did." Daniel stepped forward, voice sharp. "Come on, Hannah. Don't make this dramatic. We just wanted a nice dinner." I turned to him. "At my restaurant." He hesitated, but his arrogance returned quickly. "You're overreacting. Dad didn't mean anything by it. You know how he is." "Yes," I said softly. "I do." For a moment, silence filled the space between us. My father sighed, his tone shifting from defensive to almost pleading. We're family, Hannah. Whatever this is, it's not worth it. Let's just sit down, eat and talk. I looked at him, at the lines in his face, the proud tilt of his chin that time hadn't erased. You told me there wasn't room for me, I said. Now you're the ones without a table. He flinched, the truth cutting sharper than I expected. That's not fair. Neither was growing up invisible. For a long time, no one spoke. Then I stepped closer, my voice quiet but steady. You'll eat somewhere else tonight. But remember this, Dad, when you tell people the story of how the Porters couldn't find a table for Thanksgiving, make sure you mention that the restaurant was mine. His eyes widened, the realization settling in slowly and heavy. You own this place, he whispered. I do, I said. Every chair, every spoon, every inch you tried to ignore me for building. The words hung between us, sharp and final. Daniel looked away. My father straightened his coat, pride trying to mask the shame creeping across his face. Come on, he said to my brother, his voice brittle. We'll go. They turned and walked out into the snow. The door shut behind them with a soft click. For a long time, I just stood there breathing. Then I walked back toward the dining floor, where laughter rose again like music. Mark caught my eye as I passed. Everything all right? I nodded. Everything's exactly how it should be. And for the first time in years, I meant it. The night settled deep over Boston, wrapping the city in quiet, crystalline cold. Inside the evergreen table, warmth bloomed like a heartbeat gold light, flickering against glass silverware, gleaming the low hum of laughter spilling over the clatter of plates. Every table was full. Every guest content. Every table except one. The private dining room my father had booked stood perfectly set. 10 plates, 10 glasses, 10 folded napkins, resting like small flags of surrender. I'd ordered the candles lit anyway. It made the emptiness look deliberate, ceremonial. A monument. Mark passed by, once hesitated, then asked softly, You want me to close that room? No, I said. Let it breathe. He nodded, understanding more than he said. I moved through the dining floor, offering smiles, tasting sauces, adjusting plating with the lightest touch. But every now and then, my eyes drifted toward that closed door. My chest tightened each time, then released like the aftershock of something long buried finding air again. At 6:30, the front desk buzzed. The hostess whispered through the intercom, Chef Mr. Porter is on the line again. I didn't look up. Delete it. He said it's urgent. He sounds upset. Delete it, I repeated. I returned to the kitchen. Steam rose from the pans, fragrant and heavy with rosemary and thyme. It smelled like memory, like the home I used to imagine we were, back when Thanksgiving meant something more than seating charts and unspoken rivalries. When Mom was still alive, she used to host dinners in our tiny old house. The table was always mismatched, some chairs, wood, others metal, but she made it beautiful. She'd hum while she cooked, hair tied up, apron smeared with flour. Dad would carve the turkey, Daniel would brag about grades, and I'd be the one sneaking cranberry sauce straight from the bowl. I can still hear her voice sometimes. Family isn't about fairness, sweetheart. It's about grace. She believed that. I used to, too. Until Grace started feeling like permission for cruelty. When she died, Grace left with her. Dad filled the silence with pride. Daniel filled it with charm. And me, I learned to fill mine with work. The first Thanksgiving without her, Dad forgot to make half the dishes she used to love. He poured himself a drink and said, Guess we'll make do. Daniel laughed and turned on the TV. I sat at the end of the table and thought about the sound of her voice. That was the night I realized something permanent had shifted. Now, all these years later, the table had turned again, literally poetically. They were the ones outside looking in, and I was the one deciding whether the door stayed locked. At 7, I walked to the private dining room. The chandeliers glowed low. The candles flickered faintly. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The silence was enormous. I ran my hand across the tablecloth, feeling the cool linen under my fingers. Every detail had been perfect wine pairings, centerpieces, menu cards, with the Porter family elegantly printed at the top. I'd had them prepared before the cancellation. Now they were just artifacts of arrogance. I picked one up, traced the letters, and smiled bitterly. In the distance, I could hear faint music from the main dining room, a soft jazz cover of Autumn Leaves. It drifted through the walls like a memory. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I imagined what it would have been like if they'd loved me differently, if they'd looked at me across a table not as an inconvenience, but as someone who mattered. If my father had said, "I'm proud of you," before success forced it out of him. But that version of us never existed. When I opened my eyes, I saw the reflection of the candles dancing in the wine glasses. 10 empty seats, 10 ghosts. I took out my phone. 43 missed calls now. And one new message. Dad's voice came through the speaker, thin and strained. "Hannah, please. We're sitting in the car. The kids are hungry. Your brother's furious. I don't understand what you're trying to prove. You won all right. You've made your point. But this isn't you. You're not cruel." The silence after his words stretched long. Then I heard him sigh. "Call me if you change your mind." I hit delete. When I stepped back into the dining hall, Mark was waiting. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. He nodded, studying me quietly. "The press just called. They want to feature us again in the weekend edition. A Thanksgiving story about success and resilience." I laughed softly. "Resilience. That's one word for it." He tilted his head. "Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm fine." But later, when I went back to my office and sat in the dark, the truth hit me with quiet precision. Revenge didn't taste sweet. It tasted hollow. I had everything I'd ever wanted: the respect, the success, the control, and still a piece of me felt 12 years old again, waiting for someone to notice I was gone. Out in the dining room, dessert service began. The smell of pumpkin custard drifted through the air. Laughter swelled again, bright, easy, genuine. I thought of my father's voice in the voicemail, the sound of the children crying in the background. For a moment, I almost reached for the phone. Almost. But then I remembered every time he'd said it next time. Every dinner, every holiday, every year I'd been erased. I turned off the lights, leaned back in my chair, and let the darkness swallow the noise. Thanksgiving would end soon. The guests would go home. The city would sleep. And outside in the cold, my family would finally understand what it felt like to be left standing on the other side of the glass. The morning after Thanksgiving was still and gray. The kind of quiet that settles over a city when the parties are over and everyone's pretending they aren't hung over on disappointment. Boston's skyline looked softer through the frost, but inside the evergreen table, the aftermath glimmered in fragments: wine-stained napkins, stray crumbs of pie crust, the faint echo of laughter that didn't belong to me. I sat in my office with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the reservation ledger from the night before. The Porter name sat there crossed out in neat red ink. Final, absolute. Mark knocked softly before entering. "Morning," he said, voice low, cautious. The paper ran the feature. "They're calling you Boston's quiet force." Front page of the lifestyle section. I gave him a faint smile. Quiet's one word for it. He lingered near the door, shifting his weight. "Your father came by this morning." My head snapped up. "What?" "He didn't stay long. Left an envelope for you. Said you'd know what it was about." Mark set it on the desk, then slipped out, leaving me alone with it. The envelope was plain, my name written in his distinct, heavy-handed script. For a moment, I just looked at it, half expecting it to disappear if I blinked. When I finally opened it, I found a letter written in ink that bled slightly on the paper. "Hannah, I suppose I deserve this. You've made your point. I've made my mistakes. But I didn't raise you to turn your back on your family. I know I wasn't kind when you needed it. I know I said things that built walls instead of bridges. But I'm old now and I can't undo it. You'll understand someday when there's no one left to forgive you back. Dad." I stared at the letter for a long time, my chest tightening. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was the kind of half-hearted confession people offer when they still think time will do the rest of the work for them. A part of me, the part that was still a teenage girl aching for approval, wanted to read it as a sign of surrender. But the rest of me, the woman who owned a 2-Michelin-star restaurant, saw it for what it was, a man's attempt to shift the blame to make me feel guilty for holding him accountable. I reread the line, "I didn't raise you to turn your back on your family." A bitter laugh caught in my throat. He hadn't raised me. He had tolerated me. He had raised Daniel. He had raised a version of me that he could control. The woman I had become was a stranger to him, and he hated that he couldn't bend her to his will. The words felt like a final blow, not from hatred, but from a profound inability to understand. He didn't get it. He didn't get that I hadn't turned my back on family. I had just stopped turning my cheek. The anger I had thought would feel sweet instead felt like a dry, empty space in my chest. I had won the battle, but the war still felt endless. I folded it neatly and tucked it back into the envelope. Around noon, I walked down to the dining room. The staff was cleaning up from brunch service music, low and soft. Mark spotted me and approached carefully. "You don't have to come in today," he said. "You could rest." "Rest," I repeated. "What does that even mean anymore?" He gave a small shrug. "Maybe call your family." I let out a humorless laugh. "You think they'd answer?" He didn't respond. Just looked at me, the way you do when you want to help someone, but know they're not ready to take it. I turned away, running my hand along the back of a chair. "They'll tell themselves a story," I said. "That I've changed, that success made me cold." But I didn't change. I just stopped pretending. The truth sat heavy in my chest. Success hadn't changed me, it had exposed them. Later that afternoon, I walked outside. The snow had hardened into a glittering crust, the streets nearly empty. I found myself wandering without purpose past the bookstore, where I used to read cookbooks I couldn't afford, past the alley where I parked my food truck years ago. Back then, I dreamt of nights like last night, lights, laughter, prestige. But standing there now, the dream felt smaller than it used to. I ended up at the river, the same spot I'd gone to the day I opened Evergreen Table. I stood there, then promising myself I'd never need my family's approval again. I'd kept that promise. But as I watched the ice move slowly along the water, I realized something else. I'd built an empire, but somewhere along the way, I'd walled myself inside it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. "It's Grace, my sister-in-law, Daniel's wife. The kids keep asking why you didn't come. They don't understand. None of us do. Harold hasn't stopped talking about it. He's embarrassed, but he won't say it. I just wanted you to know, I think what you've done here, your restaurant, your life, it's incredible. I wish things were different." I read it twice, then typed a reply and deleted it 3 times before giving up. What could I possibly say? Instead, I called Mark. "Tell the staff to take tomorrow off," I said. "Full pay." There was a pause. "You sure?" "Yes. Everyone deserves a day with their family." I ended the call before he could answer. As the evening crept in, I went back to the restaurant. The lights were dim, the air still. I unlocked the private dining room and stepped inside. The table had been cleared, the candles melted down to nubs. The room smelled faintly of wax and wine. I sat at the head of the table, the one my father probably intended for himself, and closed my eyes. For a moment I could almost hear them, my brother's voice, my father's laugh, my mother's hum from years ago. The ache came sharp and sudden. I pressed my palms flat against the table to steady myself. "You wanted silence," I whispered. "Now you've got it." I stayed there until the candles flickered out completely. By the time I locked up and stepped into the street, the wind had picked up, cutting through my coat. I pulled the collar tighter and kept walking past the glowing sign of Evergreen Table, past the people hurrying home to warmth and noise. Every victory, I realized, has its price. Mine was silence. And tonight, for the first time, I wasn't sure I could afford it. The next morning came with a pale sun and the smell of coffee gone cold. I hadn't slept. The letter from my father lay open on the counter beside me, creased at the edges from where I'd folded and unfolded it all night. The words didn't get softer with time, they just kept cutting the same way. I sat there barefoot on the kitchen tile watching the steam curl from my mug and fade into nothing. That felt about right. Everything lately had a way of disappearing just as I reached for it. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a moment I thought it was Grace again, maybe Daniel this time, ready to lecture me. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, curiosity, dread, I don't know, made me swipe the screen. "Hello, Miss Porter," a man's voice said. "This is Detective Callahan with the Boston Police Department." My heart kicked once hard. "Yes, I'm calling about your father, Harold Porter." I still went. "What about him? There was a minor incident last night," he said. "Nothing serious. He's all right. But he was found at a diner near the South Station. Looked like he passed out. They think it was stress and exhaustion." I didn't speak. My fingers tightened around the phone until I heard the plastic creak. "He gave us your number," the detective continued gently. "Said you were his closest family in the city." Closest family. The irony burned. I exhaled slowly. "Where is he now, Mass General?" "They've got him under observation, but he's stable." "Thank you," I said quietly and hung up. For a long time I didn't move. The city outside my window looked the same as ever, bright and different. But inside me, something shifted. The kind of shift that starts in the chest and spreads until your heartbeat sounds different. An hour later, I was in the hospital lobby, my heels echoing across the tile. The smell of disinfectant and old coffee hung in the air. I hated hospitals. Too many ghosts. The nurse at the desk looked up. "Family of Harold Porter." "Yes." She nodded toward the end of the corridor. "Room 217, he's awake." The walk down that hallway felt longer than any distance I'd traveled in years. Each step carried every word I'd said or hadn't said to him. By the time I reached the door, my hands were trembling. He looked smaller in the hospital bed. The man who once filled every room with command now seemed deflated. The sharpness in his eyes replaced by fatigue. An oxygen tube trailed from his nose. When he saw me, his mouth twitched into something between relief and guilt. "You came?" he said softly. "I did." He tried to smile. "I must have scared you." I shook my head. "You didn't." We sat in silence for a while, the monitor beeping softly beside us. The weight of everything unsaid filled the air like static. Finally he said, "I was driving home after what happened at your restaurant. I stopped for coffee. I guess I just sat there too long. Couldn't catch my breath." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. He continued, voice rough. "I kept thinking about what you said. About me not knowing you." I looked at him then. His hands, once so sure, now trembled slightly against the blanket. "You didn't," I said quietly. "You still don't." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I thought success was the same as love. That if I pushed you hard enough, you'd thank me one day." "That's not love," I said. "No," he whispered. "It's fear. I was afraid you'd need me less. Turns out you did." The silence stretched again, this time softer. "I saw the article about you," he said. "The restaurant, the stars, the reputation. You made something beautiful, Hannah." A part of me wanted to reject the words, to call them too late. But another part, a smaller, quieter one, let them in. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not say that years ago?" He gave a weak laugh. "Pride. Stupidity. Pick your poison." I looked away, blinking hard. "You made me feel like I didn't exist, Dad. Do you understand that?" His eyes closed briefly. "I do now." We sat there until the machine beeped louder, signaling the nurse. She came in, adjusted his IV, smiled at me. "He needs rest," she said gently. I nodded and stepped back. As I turned to leave, my father's hand brushed mine. "Don't let anger be the last thing you remember of me," he said. "Please." The words lodged somewhere between my ribs. When I stepped out into the hall, the air felt thinner. My reflection in the glass looked like someone else, someone who didn't know what to do with forgiveness when it finally arrived, cracked and bleeding but real. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, slow and soft. I stood by the hospital doors, watching it drift, feeling the cold seep into my chest. My phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "The kitchen's quiet tonight. You should come by. Staff's asking about you." I typed back, "Later." Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and started walking toward the river. The city lights shimmered against the water, and for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space wide enough to hold everything I wasn't ready to say. My father's words echoed faintly in my head. "Don't let anger be the last thing you remember of me." I wasn't sure if I could promise that, but for the first time I wanted to try. The river was still half frozen when I walked into Evergreen Table the next morning. The restaurant was quiet, except for the steady hum of the heater and the faint clink of dishes being stacked in the kitchen. The night crew had already gone, leaving behind the smell of cinnamon and melted wax. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, glinting off the polished tables like a spotlight. I stood there for a long time, coat still on, watching the light move across the room. It looked different now. The same chandeliers, the same walls, but something inside me had shifted. Last night's conversation with my father replayed in fragments, his voice tired, honest in a way I hadn't heard before. I wanted to hate him. I'd built my life on that fuel. But hate doesn't hold when a man starts to look mortal. Mark appeared behind me carrying his usual clipboard. "You didn't have to come in," he said quietly. "You've had a week." I turned to him. "I didn't build this place to take weeks off." He gave a small, knowing smile. "The team's setting up for the holiday charity lunch. You're still doing it, right?" "Of course," I said. "We're feeding who we can. Always. Every year after Thanksgiving, we opened Evergreen Table to the public, no reservations, no exclusivity. Anyone could come in and eat free of charge. It was my quiet rebellion against everything my family once valued. Status appearances, exclusion. Today, though, it felt heavier. I couldn't stop thinking about that hospital room, about the way my father's hand had felt when it brushed mine, fragile human. For the first time in years, he'd looked at me like I was his daughter, not a disappointment wearing lipstick and ambition. By noon, the line outside the restaurant stretched down the block, family strangers, people clutching coats too thin for the weather. Inside, my staff moved with easy rhythm, passing trays of soup and bread, laughter echoing under the high ceilings. I rolled up my sleeves and joined them, ladling soup, refilling cups, clearing tables. No cameras, no reporters, just people. The air was warm, and for once the chatter didn't hurt, it healed. A woman at one of the tables smiled up at me as I handed her a bowl. "You're the chef, right? The one who owns this place?" I nodded. Her smile deepened. "It's beautiful. You can feel the love here." I paused for a moment, throat tight. "Thank you," I said softly. "That's exactly what I wanted." Across the room, Mark waved me over. "You've got a delivery," he said, handing me a small, unmarked box. I frowned, opening it carefully. Inside was a single folded note and a thin gold locket, the one my mother used to wear every Thanksgiving. The note was written in my father's uneven hand. "Found this in her things. It was always meant for you. She said you'd need it one day to remember where you came from, not who you were told to be." Beneath the note was a photograph my mother in our old kitchen flower, on her hands smiling at something just out of frame. I hadn't seen that picture in 20 years. I closed the box slowly, my fingers trembling. Mark must have seen my face change. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet. "Better than okay." The lunch rush lasted 3 hours. By the time the last guest left, my apron was stained, my back ached, and my heart felt strange, heavy, but somehow lighter. I stood in the middle of the empty dining room, looking at the tables still warm from use. There was no marble polish, no wine pairings, no seating lists, just crumbs, laughter, gratitude. The restaurant had never felt more like mine. Mark leaned against the bar, watching me. "You know, he said you could close early. Go see your father." I didn't answer right away. I ran my hand along the back of a chair, the same one my father had almost sat in 2 nights ago. "He's at Mass General?" Mark asked. I nodded. He smiled gently. "Then go. We'll handle the cleanup. When I reached the hospital, the nurse at the desk recognized me. He's been asking for you, she said. I hesitated outside his room, then pushed the door open. He was awake this time, eyes on the window where snow flurries drifted past like quiet ghosts. You made it, he said. I did. He looked at me, really looked like a man who'd been blind for years and was seeing light again. They told me about the charity lunch. You fed half the neighborhood. It's what Mom used to do, I said. Just on a bigger scale. He smiled faintly. She'd be proud of you, you know. I didn't speak. I just reached into my coat pocket and placed the locket on his bedside table. You found this, I said. You should keep it. He shook his head. No, she wanted you to have it. The locket glinted under the hospital light. I picked it up, opening it carefully. Inside was a tiny photo of me as a little girl sitting on my mother's lap. I hadn't known it existed. My throat closed up. I forgot that day. She didn't, my father said softly. She never forgot you, Hannah. Not once. I sat beside him, the locket still open in my hand. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the loss, not as anger and as grief. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was something close to peace. When I left, the sky had turned dark, and the streetlights glowed against the snow. I walked slowly back toward Evergreen Table. The restaurant stood waiting windows glowing warm against the cold. For the first time, I didn't see it as armor or proof. I saw it for what it really was, a place to belong. Mine. And somehow finally his, too. The snow had thickened by the time I reached home. My boots left a trail of slush up the narrow stairway to my apartment, the kind of sound that makes silence louder. Inside, the lights were low and the city outside my window glowed faintly gold. I should have been tired. I'd spent all day serving food, smiling at strangers, pretending my heart wasn't raw. But exhaustion couldn't quiet my mind. I set the small gold locket on the counter, its chain catching the light. I couldn't stop looking at it. My mother's smile frozen behind glass, a reminder of a version of us that had existed before everything cracked. The apartment was warm, but a strange chill clung to me like a memory made physical. I poured myself a glass of red wine, but the first sip burned. The taste of Thanksgiving still lingered the table. I'd claimed the silence I'd left behind. I'd won, if you could call it that. But revenge doesn't fill you up. It hollows you out in new places. My phone buzzed on the counter. Mark again. How's he doing? Better, I typed. Then after a pause, different. 3 dots appeared. Then, you okay? I stared at the question, then deleted my reply before hitting send. I didn't know how to answer that anymore. The next morning I woke to another snowfall, soft, almost unreal. The restaurant was closed, but habit pulled me there anyway. The staff had the day off. The place was dark and silent when I unlocked the door. My breath fogged in the cold air as I crossed the dining floor past the rows of empty tables. I reached the private room, the one where it had all happened. The room looked different in daylight, gentler, almost kind. The chandeliers were off, but the winter sun streamed through the window, scattering light across the silver and glass. It was strange how quickly a battlefield could look peaceful again. I sat at the head of the table, the same seat I'd taken when I told them the truth. The wood still bore a faint scratch from where my brother's ring had scraped it in shock. I traced the line with my fingertip, remembering the look on his face, my father's silence, my mother's humiliation. For a long time I'd thought that night would end everything between us, but now I wasn't sure. Some endings look like beginnings when you stand far enough away. The door creaked open behind me. I figured I'd find you here, Mark said, stepping in with 2 coffees. You're predictable, Porter. I took the cup he offered. You say that like it's a bad thing. He smiled faintly. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the reason you don't move on. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. You sound like a therapist. He shrugged. Maybe I missed my calling. We stood there in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need words. Then he said, Your brother called this morning. My heart stuttered. What? He left a message. Said he wants to meet. He's flying in tomorrow. I blinked. Flying in from Chicago. Why, Mark gave a small shrug. Didn't say. Just asked if you'd pick up the phone this time. I set my cup down slowly. He's the last person I expected to hear from. He studied me carefully. Maybe he's not coming to fight. Or maybe he is. I spent the rest of the day in motion. But none of it felt real, checking inventory, answering emails, walking through the kitchen just to hear the hum of the machines. When night fell, I went home and stood by the window staring at the lights of the city. Every car that passed below looked like a choice speeding away. At exactly 8:42 p.m., my phone rang. Daniel Porter flashed on the screen. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the green button. Then I pressed it. "Hey," I said. "Hey," came his voice, lower than I remembered, softer but unmistakable. "I didn't think you'd answer." I almost didn't. A short silence. Then, "You really owned that place the whole time?" "Yes." Another pause. "Dad told me." "Of course he did." "And what did he say? That he deserved what happened?" "Said he forgot what mattered." I exhaled slowly. "And what do you think?" "I think Daniel said you made him proud, in a way he'll never admit out loud." That made me laugh, quiet, bitter, honest. "You always were the diplomat. Someone had to be." The silence between us stretched again, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was tentative. A bridge half built. "Look," he said finally, "I'll be in town tomorrow. Can we meet? Just talk. No drama." I hesitated, then nodded even though he couldn't see it. "Yeah, we can talk." When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. The city hummed outside, alive and indifferent. Tomorrow the past would walk back into my restaurant, this time, not in judgment, but maybe, just maybe, in surrender. I looked down at the gold locket resting on the counter and whispered, "Okay, Mom, I'll try again." Outside, snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering every scar the city had left open. The snow had turned to rain by the time Daniel's flight landed. Boston looked washed out gray, the kind of morning that carried the weight of unfinished business. I was already at Evergreen Table, sitting in the corner booth near the window where I could watch the street. The restaurant wasn't open yet, just me, the quiet hum of the espresso machine, and the faint scent of lemon oil from last night's cleaning. I checked my phone. The flight arrived at 9:12 a.m. It was 10:30 now. He was late. Typical. My stomach was tight, and not because I was hungry. I hadn't seen my brother in nearly 5 years, not since the day he told me I was too emotional for business. The irony burned now more than ever. At 10:43, the door opened and Daniel walked in. Same easy confidence, same careful posture that used to charm everyone but me. His coat was damp, his hair flecked with rain, but his smile was familiar, tentative, testing the air. "Hey, hon." I stood up slowly. "You're late." He grinned faintly. "Traffic." We both knew it wasn't about traffic. He took a seat across from me, eyes scanning the room. "So this is yours," he said. He ran a hand over the polished wood of the table. Hard to believe. "Why?" I asked, leaning back. "Because I built something without your help," his smile faltered. He looked at me, really looked for the first time since he walked in. "No. Because it's beautiful. You always had a thing for detail. Mom's flowers, the way you'd set the table just right." The compliment hung there between us, heavy with history. A server passed by, leaving 2 coffees without asking. Mark's quiet signature move. I was grateful for it. Silence needed something to hold on to. Daniel took a sip. "You look tired." "How's business?" I shrugged. "You know, constant." "How's the family, Grace?" "The kids." He relaxed a fraction. "They're good. The kids are taller. Leo plays hockey now. Grace says hi. She was really worried about everything." He looked down at his hands. "Dad told me about the hospital. Said you visited." "I did." He nodded slowly. I think it meant more to him than he said. "Yeah, well," I muttered. Words weren't exactly his strength. Daniel gave a short laugh. No, they weren't. For a while we just sat there. The rain tapped against the window, steady and soft. Finally I said, "Why'd you want to meet?" He looked down at his hands again. "To apologize. For Thanksgiving. For everything." I didn't respond right away. The word apologize from his mouth sounded strange, almost foreign. "That's a big thing," I said. "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck the way he used to when he was nervous as a kid. I watched that night spiral, and I didn't stop it. I always told myself it was family order, but it was cruel, plain and simple. I knew it, and I stayed quiet. "You always stayed quiet," I said. "That was your gift." He flinched a little, then met my eyes. "And your curse was never knowing when to stay quiet." We stared at each other for a moment that felt like years. Then I laughed short, unguarded. "Fair enough." Daniel smiled, almost relieved. "You haven't changed much." "I've changed," I said. "You just don't know the version of me that stopped needing to be liked." He nodded slowly. "Dad said something else before I left. He said you were the strongest person he'd ever known." That stopped me cold. He said that, yeah. I think he finally realized he raised a fighter, not a follower. I swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the sky brightening in streaks of pale blue. "He's getting older," I said. "Maybe honesty's easier when you're tired." Daniel leaned forward. "You think he'll ever come back here? Sit down with you." "I don't know," I said. "And I don't think it matters anymore." He nodded. "Mom would have wanted him to. Mom wanted a lot of things." I said softly, glancing toward the framed photo near the bar. "The one Mark insisted we hang on the first Thanksgiving dinner we served for charity. But she taught me one thing, that stuck love isn't supposed to cost your dignity." Daniel sat back quiet for a while. Then he said, "You always make it sound easy." "It's not," I replied. "It's just necessary." He looked around the restaurant again, eyes landing on the private dining room. "That's where it happened, right?" "Yeah." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You know, I used to think power was about control, but he gestured around, "you made it about presence, being there on your own terms." I didn't answer. There was something raw in his voice, something unguarded. "Do you think we'll ever be a family again?" he asked finally. I looked at him for a long time. "I think we already are," I said. "Just not the version Dad built." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's enough." We sat there until the rain stopped completely. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "Hey," he said, pulling something from his coat pocket. "Dad wanted you to have this." He set a small envelope on the table. Inside was a single photo, my father, my mother, and me as a child sitting at our old dining table. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words: "Always your seat, Hannah." Something broke loose in my chest, sharp and warm all at once. I didn't trust myself to speak. Daniel squeezed my shoulder gently. "See you tomorrow," he said. When he was gone, I sat alone in the quiet restaurant, staring at that photo. The table in the picture was old, scratched, unremarkable, but now it meant everything. It wasn't just about belonging anymore. It was about reclaiming the right to choose who sat beside me. For the first time in years, I felt it, not victory, not vengeance, but peace. A kind of peace I hadn't known how to imagine. Outside, the clouds began to part, and the first light of afternoon spilled through the glass landing directly on the photo in my hands. The seat was still mine. Always had been. The next Thanksgiving came faster than I expected. The year had moved in quiet circles, court filings for expansion, late nights, and the kitchen hospital visits that grew less tense each time. Life had stopped feeling like a battle and started feeling like rebuilding piece by fragile piece. But when the leaves turned gold again, something inside me shifted. I could feel the weight of the calendar, the memory of that table, the words my father had spoken, "Always your seat, Hannah." This time, I planned Thanksgiving differently. No grandeur, no exclusivity, no lists that decided who belonged. Just one long table under warm light, open to whoever walked through the door. My staff called it the People's Feast. Mark said it was poetic. I said it was overdue. By noon, Evergreen Table was alive with noise, kids laughing, the sound of plates clinking, music humming softly from the speakers. The smell of roasted turkey and sage butter filled the air. Every seat was taken and no one asked about reservations. In the middle of the room, I stood watching it all unfold, a slow, steady smile spreading across my face. For the first time, this place didn't feel like armor. It felt like home. Mark appeared beside me, wiping his hands on a towel. "Full house," he said. "You've outdone yourself, Porter." I laughed. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. Just proud." He hesitated, then added quietly, "There's someone waiting outside. His name's Harold." I froze, my hand tightening around the edge of the counter. My father, Mark, nodded. "He didn't want to interrupt, but he's there. Thought you should know." For a moment, all the air left my lungs. I hadn't seen my father since his discharge from the hospital months ago. We'd spoken on the phone a few times, short calls, careful words, but face to face. That was uncharted ground. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked toward the door. The sound of laughter and clattering plates faded behind me until it was just the faint echo of my heartbeat. He stood outside, bundled in a thick coat, hair grayer than before. When he saw me, his eyes softened and he managed a small, uncertain smile. "Didn't think you'd actually come," I said quietly. "Didn't think you'd actually open the doors for everyone," he replied. I smiled faintly. "People change." "They do," he said. Then after a pause, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "It's your table too." Inside, the warmth hit us both, the smell of cinnamon and roasted apples, the hum of conversation. My father looked around, awe flickering in his eyes as he took it all in. "This is," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "It's beautiful, Hannah." I led him to a seat near the back, close enough to see the whole room. He lowered himself slowly, his hands trembling slightly. I poured him a glass of cider. "I saw your brother last week," he said after a moment. "He told me you've been working nonstop." "I don't know how to do anything else," I said with a small shrug. He chuckled softly. "You get that from me." The words made me pause, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. For a while we sat in silence, watching families laugh, strangers passing dishes, as if they'd known each other for years. Across the room, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, can we come back next year?" My father smiled. "You built something lasting," he said. "I built something fair," I corrected. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Fairness is harder than success." I studied him for a long moment. "You know, last year, I thought revenge was what I needed. But it wasn't." He met my gaze. "What was it?" "Reclaiming my story." He smiled, then small, tired, real. "You always did write your own endings." For the first time, I saw him not as the man who'd excluded me, but as one who'd learned too late. Regret had carved him down to something fragile, something honest. I reached into my pocket and took out the gold locket. I placed it on the table between us. "She'd have liked this," I said. "All of it." He touched the locket gently, his fingers trembling. "She'd have loved it. She'd have loved you." I think I believe that now. We sat there for a long time, surrounded by the noise of laughter and clinking plates. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even comfortable, but it was something close to forgiveness. When dessert was served, I handed him a plate of pumpkin pie. He laughed softly. "You still remember how your mother used to make it?" "I don't have to remember," I said. "It's her recipe." He took a bite and closed his eyes. "Tastes like home." And somehow it did. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I stood at the door thanking people as they passed. My father lingered beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Next year," he said, "maybe I'll help cook." I smiled. "You can try. But I'm not giving up the chef's seat." He laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "I wouldn't dream of it." When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, I looked out at the long table, crumbs, glasses, half-full napkins folded neatly beside empty plates. It looked lived and loved. This wasn't the Thanksgiving I'd been denied. It was the one I'd built. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the girl was left out of the picture. I felt like the woman who'd taken the camera framed it herself and invited everyone else to sit down. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and endless. And this time, I didn't feel the cold. I felt belonging. I felt at peace. I turned to my father and said, "Welcome home." He smiled, eyes shining. "Thanks, kiddo. It feels good to be here." The first light of morning fell across the empty tables, catching the shimmer of crystal and the soft sheen of oak. Thanksgiving was over, but evergreen tables still smelled like warmth, cinnamon, butter, laughter that had soaked into the walls. I stood alone in the dining room, the echo of last night humming through the silence. The table stretched long and unbroken crumbs scattered like little memories of joy. For years I'd stared at tables where I didn't belong. Last night I had finally sat at one I'd built myself. I walked to the head of the table and ran my fingers along the polished wood. My father's chair was still slightly pushed back, as if he'd only stepped away for a moment. I could still hear his laugh when he tried to help a little boy serve soup and nearly dropped the ladle. For the first time in my life, his laughter hadn't felt like a judgment, it had felt like home. A light knock sounded from the doorway. Mark leaned against the frame, his jacket slung over one shoulder, a quiet smile on his face. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. I shook my head. The quiet's too loud after a night like that. He stepped into the room, glancing at the long table. "You did it, Hannah. You turned a wound into something sacred." I smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like revenge anymore." "That's because it isn't," he said. "It's a legacy." We stood there for a moment, side by side, the morning light catching the dust in the air. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat in her car outside cheap apartments eating cold takeout, dreaming of a kitchen with her name on it. That girl had wanted justice, but the woman standing here now wanted peace. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Mark asked suddenly. "Opening a place somewhere quiet, Maine maybe? Somewhere without ghosts?" I laughed softly. "This city made me. I think the ghosts and I made peace." He nodded, satisfied. "Then it's time to open for lunch." But I didn't move. My eyes lingered on the far end of the table where my mother's old locket lay, beside a half-empty glass of cider. The chain glimmered like a line of light connecting everything I'd been through, the rejection, the silence, the revelation. I picked it up, pressing the cool metal against my palm. For the first time, it didn't sting. It pulsed with something gentler, memory without pain. "I used to think power meant control," I said quietly. "But it doesn't. It means choosing grace, even when no one deserves it." Mark gave a small smile. "That's what makes you different." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall again, soft, deliberate, as if the city itself was exhaling. The windows fogged, slightly blurring the line between inside and out. I turned toward the kitchen where the staff was already arriving, their voices breaking the quiet. The smell of coffee filled the air. Someone laughed, a loud, genuine sound that carried through the hall. For a second, I imagined my mother standing at the stove, wiping her hands on her apron, telling me to taste the sauce. I imagined my father at the sink, humming off-key. The ghosts weren't gone, they were just softer now, folded into the rhythm of the life I'd built. When my phone buzzed, I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made me stop. "Daniel." I answered, smiling. "Morning." "Morning," he said. "Dad's asking if you'll save him a seat next year." I laughed quietly. "There's always a seat." He hesitated, then added, "He said to tell you he's proud. He doesn't say it much, so I thought I'd pass it along before he changes his mind." I blinked hard, swallowing the sudden lump in my throat. "Tell him thanks," I said. "And tell him he still owes me a dishwashing shift." Daniel chuckled. "Deal." When I hung up, Mark was watching me. "Good news." "The best kind," I said. "The kind you never thought you'd get." He smiled, heading back to the kitchen. I stayed where I was, the locket warm in my hand, the air around me filled with the hum of life. I walked to the window and watched the snow thicken, blanketing the street outside in white. The city looked softer, quieter, and forgiving. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing on the outside of anything. I was in it fully, fiercely, finally. As I turned off the last light before opening the doors, I whispered to the empty room, the tables set, the stories told. Outside, the sign above the restaurant glowed softly against the snow, evergreen table. Everyone has a seat. And that was the truth of it. Revenge had turned into something else entirely, not victory, not punishment, but a kind of healing that stretched beyond bloodlines and bitterness. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about becoming the kind of woman who no longer needed to. So I unlocked the door, let the cold air rush in, and smiled as the first guests of the day stepped inside. This time there were no reservations, only welcome. If this story touched you, share it. Tell someone who's ever been left out that there's still a seat waiting for them. Because forgiveness, like a table, is only complete when everyone's invited to sit.